Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and welcome to the Post 9, bringing your whole self to work, or not. This is a vlog of conversation starters, of arguments for your consideration. It's not about rules or mantras this week. And I'll tell you how we got here. One of my former students contacted me via LinkedIn. I taught him 20 years ago in two courses that I taught for about a decade: Introduction to Cultural Studies and Cultural Difference and Diversity. And tens of thousands of students passed through these courses and they've all gone on to wonderment and wonderful careers, and you are all changing the world one person at a time. I am proud of you. Now, I'm not sure if I'd be able to run courses like that now. There was a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and we explored some very, very controversial ideas. But one of these great students, and many have, but one of these great students has stayed in contact with me and did contact me via LinkedIn, and he was troubled. He was concerned. I won't use his name because he has an unusual name, but we will call him Karl for the purposes of the vlog today. So Karl said he wanted my advice. Now, when I knew Karl 20 years ago, he was not only a fabulous human being, he was an out gay man, and he still is an out gay man. But he was feeling uncomfortable in his current workplace because he found his current workplace was wanting to celebrate his gayness. And so he felt like he was being introduced to clients with, here is Karl, and by the way, he's gay. Here's Karl, our gay worker. And he was quite concerned about this because he thought his identity was being used to sort of show that the workplace was a bit edgy, a bit trendy, a bit down with the young people. And he was uncomfortable by this. And he went back to the collection of readings that I gave students in cultural difference and diversity to try and work out why he was uncomfortable. And he also went to talk to his line manager gently and say, look, feeling a bit uncomfortable, could you just not introduce me in that way? It's a private matter. And the manager said, oh, no, we have a commitment at this workplace. You bring your whole self to work. We are proud of that. Now, that seems great. I know, it seems tremendous. That's the sort of workplace we want, I think. But then Karl was getting increasingly concerned by this, and he asked me why he was feeling so uncomfortable. And he had returned to a reading I gave my students from the legendary Eve Sedgwick, The Epistemology of the Closet. Wow, that book changed knowledge. And that book really did demonstrate that sexuality, like just about everything else in our lives, is not configured through this simple binary opposition of heterosexuality versus homosexuality. Experience and consciousness in life is much more complicated than that sort of binary opposition. And also that book problematized the notion of being out of the closet or in the closet. And Karl remembers me at the time saying, it's not so much a matter of being in or out of a closet. It's not a closet, it's a revolving door. That's the nature of consciousness. So he asked me what I thought about this bringing your whole self to work gig. And I said, I'm interested in that as well, Karl. I've been thinking about that for a couple of years. I haven't expressed what I've thought about this movement because, to be honest, I had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. It's like, my life, my private life is my business. The workplace doesn't deserve my private life. But for Karl and for myself, I thought, let's actually go through the argument. Let's read the literature. Let's do this work properly. Remember, I always say to my students, don't assume the argument, make the argument. So today, let's make the argument. And I've read the literature around the bringing your whole self to work movement. I've put myself through LinkedIn courses as a leader, but also as a worker for this bringing your whole self to movement gig. And I also noticed as I was completing the reading for the vlog for you this week, my friends on Facebook were responding to my Goodreads post. So I'd be, reading the book, doing a review, and it would be posted on Facebook. And my friends, my own friends, were split. Half of them were very much, my private life is my private life, the workplace does not own that. And the other half was, you know what, I have a right to bring my whole self to work and I will deal with the consequences of that. Wow, okay. So therefore, for the post this week, I wanted to capture that diversity of views. So we're presenting 5 arguments in favour of bringing your whole self to work. And of course, the old goth returns with 5 arguments why you really don't want to go there. And by the way, I'm convinced by both. I think both arguments are sound, and it really is about you making a decision in different workplaces, I think. So let's firstly start, as we always do, with definitions. What's this bring your whole self to work phrase thing actually mean? Well, the most encompassing presentation of the concept comes from Mike Robbins in his 2018 book, Bring Your Whole Self to Work. He also runs a podcast on that topic entitled too, which I do recommend to you. Now, he argues that success in the contemporary workplace is reliant on workers bringing their whole self to the workplace because it creates a culture and environment of safety for people, but it also enables safety for teams. Teams, therefore, can innovate if they are safe. He also makes the argument that our workplaces improve when we recognise the vulnerability in ourselves, but also in others. So this open work culture encourages courage, the capacity to speak up and contribute, to ask for help when required, and you're moving into a workplace where you feel people around you are both committed and innovative. Great. So when actioned, this Mike Robbins workplace becomes a place of authenticity and humanity. Wow, tremendous stuff. Now, clearly our workplaces are completely failing to reach that standard. And of course, that's even before the Great Resignation of 2021. A Gallup poll in 2016 reported in the United States only 32% of US workers were engaged in and with their job. Right. So clearly, most of us, most of the time, are not remotely fulfilled by the paid workplace. So this means that workers are not encouraged to perform at their best. That means that the performance of the entire team declines, stress increases, and the attrition of staff, the turnover of staff, also increases. So for the organisation, this is very serious because there's a lack of collaboration and there's a lack of results or outputs. So there are 5 bits in this ideology or trope of bring your whole self to work. There are 5 bits. Firstly, be authentic. Secondly, use the power of appreciation. 3, I'm going to go there, focus on emotional intelligence. 4th, embrace a growth mindset. And 5, create a championship team. Okay, now you know I'm an old goth. I have so many problems with so many of these phrases that I can hardly speak them. Now, you know, I want to believe, I do. I want to believe, but then, you know, life. We all want to be authentic. We want to appreciate other people in their authenticity. We want to grow. We all want to be part of that terrific team and feel valued. But what we're lacking here is any theorisation of what's actually happening in the contemporary workplace. So the endless restructures, the casualisation of the workplace, 0-hour contracts, and so on. But I did want to acknowledge that I was convinced by the definition that Robbins created about emotional intelligence. Now, I despise the phrase emotional intelligence. When I hear it, I want to stir fry my own small intestine, right? But can I say, for the first time in my life, I read a definition of emotional intelligence that I'm quite impressed by. He argued that emotional intelligence is building a relationship between self-awareness and self-management and social awareness and relationship management. I can live with that. That's a pretty good definition, okay? And it's something we can think about and we can apply. So we've got our definition of the bringing your whole self to work thing. I'm now going to talk about the 5 strengths of this movement, the 5 great gifts that bringing your whole self to work give you. So let's start with the positive stuff, right? 1. Wow. Authenticity is valuable. Yep. How could we ever argue against authenticity, right? It's like arguing against motherhood or eating carrots. It's difficult to argue against the value of authenticity. And look, being authentic is powerful and important in the workplace. The alternative is that we live a lie and we remain mostly disconnected from the workplace and it lacks any real meaning. And we know what that looks like because most people are doing that most of the time. The strength of coming to a workplace with authenticity, particularly authenticity about who we are, is that we make better decisions in the workplace. So the research shows if we're not second guessing ourselves, if we're not lying to ourselves in the workplace, when the moment comes to make a difficult decision, we make a better decision when we've brought our authentic self to work. I like that a lot. So when we bring our whole self to work, our job satisfaction increases and our capacity to make good decisions also increases. Excellent. 2, acknowledging your vulnerability supports others. We're going to return to vulnerability and the problems with it right at the end of the vlog today. But we know, I think, all of us who have read the legendary Professor Brené Brown know that vulnerability is incredibly important to individuals, to groups, and indeed to the world. And in a workplace, we need to understand the gifts of vulnerability. And you know what? That gift of vulnerability is not to and for ourselves. It's actually the bedrock for the creation of a strong team. A workplace that acknowledges vulnerability, loss, grief, has reduced staff turnover, but also has a staff group that is prepared to take risks and to innovate. It also allows people to recover in a structured and supported fashion when life's tragedies emerge. So vulnerability creates trusting teams. Tremendous argument, tick, fabulous. 3, it creates a workplace of appreciation rather than recognition. So bringing your whole self to work creates a culture of appreciation rather than recognition. This one affected me deeply. This changed my life, this one. So when we bring our whole self to work, it ensures that we are more than workers. We are a fully fleshed being. Therefore, a culture of appreciation is created. The very fact of being a human is of value. So you are appreciated for being you rather than recognised for your success in a performance-based metric. So this appreciation culture appreciates the value of the whole person rather than simply noticing the value of the outputs that they create. It creates better communication, creates a better organisation. Put another way, appreciation values people. Recognition values outputs. Brilliant. 4, Bringing your whole self to work enables another mode of feedback. And again, this one changed me as well, changed me. Now, like most of us, I suppose, I've got some fascinating examples through my life when someone says the immortal words to you, I've got some feedback to offer you. Basically in that tone too, because I've got some feedback. Have you, girlfriend? Yeah, I've got some feedback. And we all know what's coming because the feedback is then housed in this enormous abuse narrative of, I don't like you, I don't like your mother, I don't like your shoes, and you really need how to learn how to apply eyeliner. But in bringing your whole self to work culture, feedback is positioned in a growth mindset. Now let's try and unpick that weird phrase a bit if we can. So what this means is someone actually has to give you permission to get feedback. So it means feedback is not about somebody giving it to you. It is about feedback being offered in the context of a relationship. So people are accountable for the feedback that they offer. So this is not only about giving feedback, it's about receiving feedback and placing that feedback in the context of the organisation. So this mantra, I think, also carries a little bit of Brené Brown with it as well. That great quote where she said, if you're not in the arena getting your butt kicked too, I'm not interested in your feedback. End of quote. Fantastic. Now I think we're all with Brené on that one. Again, great point. Convinced by that one. Transforms feedback. Excellent. Let's go to the fifth positive variable here. Bringing your whole self to work returns purpose into our lives. Now look, there are a lot of different definitions of purpose. My favourite definition of purpose is connecting with something bigger than yourself. So it may be committing to social justice, a social movement. It may be providing for your family. It may be picking up cans off a beach. Tremendous. It may be simply returning the trolley back to the trolley bay at the supermarket. Believing in something beyond yourself. So when we bring the whole self to work, we create a culture of trust and authenticity and also respect. And that allows us to remember something beyond the selfie culture, beyond the me, look at me, if you looked at me, I'm fabulous, look at me. And it helps us remember, I think, the line from those great philosophers, Kansas, that we are really just dust in the wind. So we learn new ways to gain meaning and purpose beyond ourselves, beyond our atomized identity. Okay, now they're the positive attributes. Now, as you can see, they are great attributes. I'm convinced by that. I want to work in this workplace. This is tremendous. We feel valued, we feel appreciated. This is terrific. And of course, we know that if and when life's tragedies happen to and for us, that we are working in an environment that will care for us in a supported fashion. That's beautiful. We all want that. But let's get real. Let's get real. Let's get goth. Let's go goth. And the 5 reasons you really, really don't want to bring your whole self to work. 1. This is the important one. This culture can only emerge and exist if leaders, the people in power, make it exist. Right. So the bring your whole self to work movement is a top-down movement. It is a leadership movement. Now, I know we get a lot of wonderful leadership theorists who watch these vlogs. Big hello to Karen. Karen, you're an amazing human. But can I just say, if you're going to do the bring your whole self to work movement, it's the leadership models that are the servant leadership models or the authentic leadership models that allow this to happen. They work quite well. Unfortunately, we live in an era, as we all know, of the charismatic leadership model and the transactional leadership model. So the look at me, look at me, look at me leader, Elon Musk, anybody. Or of course the transactional leader that we've all worked for, which is you are paid. you are paid this money to deliver these outputs. I want these outputs, right? You know those people, we have a strategic plan, we have an operational plan, we have a risk register, and you need to deliver on the strategic plan. Okay, so unless you have a great boss who believes in this culture, it will never happen. It will never happen. And if an individual worker decides to bring the whole self to work, when they've got a charismatic or a transactional leader, they're going to be crushed. 2, work is just work. It is not our entire life. This one's for you, Leanne. Work is just work. It's not your entire life. The challenge with the bring your whole self to work movement is it makes work much more important than it needs to be in the configuration of our identity. So if we understand work for what it is, which is effort in for payment out, then we grasp, I think, with a fair amount of consciousness, how work is actually organised, the point of work. We've all seen people, we've all worked with these remarkable people who, you know, more dreadfully say, oh, they've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? But we've all worked with those people that really do believe in the vision, right? They believe, and they work 18-hour days, they spend time away from their family, away from their friends, and they really believe in this workplace. This workplace is their life. And then we've seen those people discarded when their role is simply restructured out of the organisation. Because work is not a religion. Work is not a faith structure. So therefore it is incredibly important for your survival in these tough times that you create very clear boundaries between your workplace and the rest of your life. And look, I note the wonderful Bridget Schultz book. I really enjoyed this book with this great title. The title was Overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. And she expresses the pain, the inadequacy, the futility of the current workplace, which she describes with the phrase, quote, if I could just finish. If I could just finish. Our whole culture is based on having 57 things going and we can't finish anything. Well, you know what? Start something, finish it, end your work, and go for a walk. 3, value your time rather than your whole self. The current workplace has all sorts of strategies to encourage you to do more work than you are actually being paid for, to spend more time than you're actually being paid for. So workplaces have all these weird fitness challenges, teams compete with their Fitbit, so then the work then proceeds to colonise fitness and leisure. This is going well. And then of course there's digitisation, beep, 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 24/7, you remain on call. Now actually, since the Industrial Revolution, there has been a transformation in how we think about time. Before the industrialisation, work was organised around tasks. So task orientation. So someone was building a table, they would start the table and they would finish when the table was finished. If you were on a farm, then you were pruning grapevines, you would start pruning grapevines, and when you finish that row, you would stop pruning grapevines, right? The harvest needs to be brought in, you start the task, and it finishes when you've brought in the harvest. Task orientation. But the Industrial Revolution required what's called industrial time. Everybody had to clock in and clock off. And if you're interested in this topic, then I really recommend a wonderful old article from E.P. Thompson that explored time and industrial discipline. But since the Industrial Revolution, we have been paid on time, the time we have worked. And of course, wages have stagnated, particularly in the last 20, 30 years, and work is increasingly casualised. So more and more work has to be gained from fewer and fewer hours that are paid. So we have 0-hour contracts, we have internships, and casual hours without any health benefits or sick leave attached. And of course there is digitisation that now has colonised our free time. So this bringing your whole self to work movement is a strategy to continue to colonise your free time. Or put another way, colonise your life. So instead of bringing your whole self to work, I want you to think a lot more about how your time is organised at work and outside of it. Because trust me, at the end of our lives, on the day we die, we are not going to be thinking, wow, I should have answered 10 more emails yesterday, or you know that strategic planning away day in 2013, I really should have committed more and thought more deeply. You're not going to be thinking that on the last day on this planet. So instead of thinking about this work and life balance stuff, think about your professional life and your personal life as a dance. Now for some wonderful humans, it may be a waltz. For some of us, it's more body slamming at the Roxy in 1976. But what I do is I plan out my entire Microsoft calendar. I don't know if this is useful, but I don't have a public or a private calendar. I organise my time on one calendar and I put everything there, not only medical appointments and shopping, but for example, if I'm going to a Senate meeting, that's 3 hours, but I know it takes me between 6 and 7 hours to prepare for that Senate meeting, so I put all the preparation time to do the work tasks on the calendar as well. So you really do understand where your time is going. You can see what's for work, what's your relationship with your significant other people in your life, your family, your friends, and what's your work time, is there leisure. You can really see your whole life. And then you can start to see the rumba of your life. Are you spending too much time at work? Look at your time and make a determination. 4, crucial one for me, 4, think about and reflect on the transitions into and out of work. The challenge, I think, with this whole bring yourself to work, whole self to work movement, I think, is it doesn't really understand how big and complex and messy our lives actually are. The demands on us at the moment, beyond the workplace, beyond, we've got big selves at the moment. We have so many demands on us. We could never bring a whole person to a workplace. But what I find stunning about this movement is there's no attention at all on transitional times. So these liminal moments between the workplace and the home. So they may be commuter times. They may be taking your kids to a sporting event. It may be looking after a parent, taking them to a medical appointment. All sorts of in-between experiences. Going grocery shopping. These liminal moments of our lives. I call these moments the lungs of life. The lungs of life. We very rarely think about how oxygen gets into our body. It just sort of happens. And I think these liminal moments are the same. We take a breath in, we have a context, we understand the diversity of functions in our life and the diversity of people in our lives. But in these commutes, in these waiting rooms, in these liminal times, they're incredibly important to who we are. Particularly, I would argue, in the transition from work to other functions, as a parent, as a child, as a friend, or powerful and potent moments of aloneness. So we don't need to bring our whole self to work. We don't need to bring work home. What we need is attention to the liminal spaces and times of our life. Because in these transitions, we start to make decisions about who we are and what's important. In the literature, these are sometimes called the powering down moments. For me, they've always been reflecting out. Think about reflecting out. 5, never underestimate the ruthlessness of the contemporary workplace. Seriously. So as we've talked about, if leaders want you to feel safe, then they can create a culture where you will feel safe. But your life, your identity, the quality of your life is determined by the calibre of your boss. And indeed the boss of your boss and the boss of your boss of your boss. There are plenty of universities that have wonderful human beings as middle managers who want to care for you, who want to enable your career, who want to support you. But those middle managers have been given a budget below payroll. They have been instructed that people have to leave the organisation in the next year. So their demands are they have to cut as many staff as possible. So they may want a listening culture, a respectful culture, but as we bounce from meeting to meeting, metric to metric, KPI to KPI, the capacity to listen and reflect and transform, those times, those imperatives are lost. So we do not live in a workplace, we do not live in a time, we do not live in a culture of journeys. We live in a culture, we have a workplace of outputs, and those outputs are benchmarked. And we all know, don't we, that if we get sick, the workplace will discard us and replace us the next day, and people won't even remember our name. So for all our bringing our whole self to work, I think we know deep down in ourselves that no one actually cares at all about us, because they're just trying to hold on to their job in tough times. And I also note, I think, and I need to pop this into Irving Goffman's remarkable work in Stigma. Again, a book that changed the world. Now, Stigma probes what happens to those people in our culture, and I probably include myself in this conversation too, that are stigmatised. And the groups that are stigmatised, and I'll use the Goffman word spoilt, end of quote, what they have to do to survive is cover their identities. So Goffman refers to this as covering, right? So while bringing your whole self to work may seem tremendous and seems to encourage a diversity of workers, the challenge is that particular workers remained marked and remain stigmatised, and to survive they have to cover who they are. Can I say the other problem with this bringing your whole self to work thing, and I've got this wonderful phrase from Susan Cain's book, she argues that it's part of the culture of, quote, the tyranny of positivity, end of quote. That is, you know, that work and family and love and relationships, it's all going to work out. It's all going to be great. I don't know how much more evidence we need about the energy crisis, the food crisis, the complexity of health and the pandemic and the workplace. I don't know how much more evidence we require that things are not going well at the moment. Hoping for the best is really not going to get us there at the moment. We have to intervene. We have to enact action to summon change. We have to fight for a different future. And to quote the great Princess Leia to Obi-Wan Kenobi, that is really our only hope. But what I think I've learnt from the post this week, and I've really enjoyed, I've been deeply touched, as you can see by the research I've done for this week, is that leadership matters. I mean, we've always sort of known that, but leadership really matters. And if you have a chance to take on a leadership role, please do it. please do it. And I think what the vlog this week shows is leaders can change the world. Now, we started this post with Karl's concerns, and I think he was right to be concerned. But I wanted to finish today with two stories from me, one where I didn't bring my whole self to work and one where I did, and the consequences of both. So let's of course start with the negative story, and it is a shocker. Now, as most of you know, when my late husband Steve Redhead got sick and died, he wanted his sickness completely private. So what that meant was I couldn't tell anybody about the illness, so I couldn't get support. So I had to just go to work as normal and try to put caring responsibilities around life and work, if you will. And it was a private sickness, and he wanted that, and I was able to deliver that for him. But of course I knew, and I think he probably knew, that it was never going to be a private death. Not only had Steve taught tens of thousands of people, but he had transformed, he'd developed, he'd created a whole series of different disciplines. And of course, when he died, he had an obituary in the Times Higher Education. And that's a great gift that is given to very few academics who have changed knowledge. So, you know, we had journals being dedicated to him, whole journals on his work, we had books dedicated to him, prizes named after him. So I knew it was never going to be a private death. And indeed, even as his wife, and knowing, you know, when he died, most of me probably died with him, and I knew that. But I also knew, I think, that the loss was much worse than that. It was catastrophic because the world lost a truly brilliant mind that could have actually made a difference. And of course, we know the pandemic and everything would occur after his death, but that great mind could really have helped us, if you will. But I returned to work the day after Steve died, and back to our leadership point, I had a great Vice-Chancellor and a really great line manager, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research, who were great guys. They were really great guys, experienced guys, and they let me just get on with it. They had a good sense of grief, a good sense of death, and they were prepared for me to just come to work and get on with work and manage grief privately. They handled it brilliantly. But there was one manager that behaved disgracefully at the time, and he was new to the university, and he made an appointment with me to supposedly discuss higher degree policy in his college. That's great, got my iPad, very excited by that. Off I went to his office. But when I arrived, I think I realised something was going wrong, because instead of a professional conversation, I had pictures of myself all over his desk and a CV from somewhere and articles. Stuff about me was all over his desk, and he proceeded to ask all these pretty probing, and to be honest, I felt deeply invasive, invaded questions. And it went on and on and on. And every time, he'd done it 9 times, and every time he'd done it, I'd said, look, can we please, you know, we're not here to talk about me, can we please return to the higher degree policy that I'm here to discuss? And he kept going back to talking about me and my private life and my interests and my dreams and my hopes. And on the 10th time, I started to cry. And of course, I'm not a crier. I'm not against crying. If people want to cry, that's great. That's what we want. But I think, as most women know, when you cry, it has different meanings in a workplace than when a bloke cries. And look, as always, I cried, but I got myself back together very, very quickly. And I said, look, please, can we just talk about higher degree policy? What are your priorities? And he finally went back to that conversation. It took about 3 minutes and the meeting ended. But then what happened was remarkable. The story now gets a bit juicy. A very good mate of mine was an administrator, high up administrator in this particular college, and he reported to me what then happened. So this particular senior manager, after the meeting, just sort of burst into the tea room and said, gee, that Dean of Graduate Research, Tara, she's not very good, is she? She just cried her way through our first meeting. Now, luckily, a mate of mine was in the tea room. About 10, 12 people were in the tea room at that time. And my mate, bless him, there was silence. And then my mate said, bless him, "You are aware her husband died 2 weeks ago, aren't you?" Silence in the room. And as my mate described it to me later, all the 10, 12 people sort of turned to the bloke in absolute disgust and then turned away and went back to their coffee. And needless to say, he got himself some hot water pretty quickly and went back to his desk. But of course, this is a university. So what proceeded to happen in the next 3 hours is my mate called me and the phone was running hot in my office with people going, "What's happened? This is terrible. This is unbelievable." And because it's a university, the gossip spread throughout throughout the entire organisation quite quickly. So I'd be at a meeting and someone before going, "Oh, I heard what happened. What an absolute expletive." I'd be in the women's toilet. "Oh, Tara, I heard. Oh my goodness me." So this gossip went on and on and on. So 48 hours later, this particular manager sent me a short email, quote, "I did not know that you had suffered a recent bereavement. It was not my intention to upset you." Now, of course, I replied immediately with, "What you did and my behaviour has nothing to do with the death of my late husband. My private life is very separate from my workplace. I am here to do a job. Please let me do my job." No reply to that email. But what I need you to think about is, and know, that there are terrible people in leadership that actually want to suck your life out of you so that they can hurt you. And you need to know that. And you know what? Never give them the right to do that. Don't give them the right to do that. But I wanted to finish with a positive story, which is so unusual for me, about a moment when I did bring the whole self to work and it made a difference. Now, my last job was in a research portfolio in a university, and so the DVCR and I would quite regularly go out and do gigs, you know, for different institutes or centres, or for early career researchers or mid-career researchers. And we were doing one of these gigs, and they're great fun, doing one of these gigs one day and doing, you know, policy updates and new innovations and so forth in the research space. So we did the nice presentation and then stopped, and of course there's this informal chat and coffee after this session, and that's great. And immediately that I went to get a cup of coffee, this wonderful woman came over to me, late 40s, early 50s, face quite devastated and ravaged, hair, you know, unruly. She looked like the world was on her shoulders, and she introduced herself to me, and tears just started to pour out of her eyes. And so I moved her gently to the side of the room, because obviously people were looking at what was going on here, and she told me that her husband had died 3 months ago and that she was just not managing. And I always remember how she said it, which is like, "I'm just not managing." And obviously she knew what happened to me with Steve, and she just told me, "I need help, I need help, I'm not managing, I'm just not managing." And she started to absolutely sob. You know, the grief that comes deep within you, that is not only about loss and death, but about the death of a person, but also the death of who you thought you would be, and the death of a future. Deep, deep grief. So I quietly talked with her. We talked about what she went through, and we put in place some pretty straightforward strategies just to move through the day. How to handle the profound, dreadful aloneness of Sundays. People, after you've lost somebody, never tell you how bad Sundays are, so I gave her strategies for that. I gave her some breathing exercises. So you breathe fear out, you breathe hope in, fear, hope in, and also strategies to use the workplace to provide the punctuation and the structure for the next stage of your life. She nodded through all of this, she wrote some of it down, and then the sobbing started to cease. And then she asked if she could hug me. And I said, of course, of course. So she hugged me tightly, I hugged her tightly back, and I whispered to her, "I've I've got you. We're going to be okay. We'll do this together. And she cried, cried and cried. And when the hug ended, she looked at me and she said, "No one has hugged me in 3 months. I think they're frightened of me. Thank you for not being frightened of me." That's the gift of bringing the whole self to work. If I'd balked, if I'd been overwhelmed by the scale of this remarkable woman's grief, then I would have lost something of myself if I had not shown up for her. But showing up for others during the worst moments of their life reminds every single one of us that we can save a life, maybe just for a moment. But really, isn't a moment all we've got? So what these stories reveal, I hope, is the bringing your whole self to work thing is like the epistemology of the closet. We can't think about private and public. We can't think of inside the closet or outside the closet. It's not a binary opposition. It's not clean, because none of us are either in or we're out. We have the right to our stories, and we have the right to share them or to guard them closely within us. We have that right. And we must never lose that right. We must never lose ourselves to the workplace, to policies, or to procedures. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.